Here we'll do an example with mixed volume units. We're given a cylindrical cup that has a base with a diameter of 6 inches and a height of 12 inches. We are asked to find the volume in cubic inches and then convert that to liters. Our first step will be to write a formula for the volume of a cylinder. You may not have seen this formula before, so I'll give it to you now. There are two different ways we can write the volume for a cylinder. We can say that the volume is equal to pi times r squared times h, with the v standing for volume, r standing for radius, h standing for height, and pi being the decimal value 3.14. You'll use this version if you know the radius. However, we don't have the radius. What we have is the diameter. If you have the diameter, there's an alternate form of the equation you can use. The alternate form is 0.25 times pi times d squared times h. The v still stands for volume, but now the d stands for diameter. H still stands for height. And of course, pi is still 3.14. Since we know the diameter but not the radius, it may be easier for us to use this second form. If you don't want to learn the second form, you could always find the radius based on the diameter, but I find the second form is easier. Our first step will be to apply that formula. We'll say that our volume is equal to 0.25 times pi, which I'll represent as 3.14, times our diameter, that is the distance along the bottom, which I'll label as d, and we'll write 6 raised to the second power. Then we multiply times the height, which I'll label with an h, that's 12 inches, that's how tall our glass is. We'll now take all of these numbers and go to the calculator. For those of you who don't have a scientific calculator, you may want to handle that 6 squared first. We'll take 6 to the second power now, and note that that's 36. Therefore, in our problem, we don't have to write 6 squared, we can rewrite it as 36 and do the math that way. Our multiplication chain could be 0.25 times 3.14 times 36 times 12. This will work also. If you have a scientific calculator, you don't have to do it this way. You can just enter the exponents and you'll be fine. We'll take 0.25 multiplied by 3.14 multiplied by 36 multiply by 12. When we press enter, we get 339.12. Since this equation was for volume, we can safely assume that the units will be third power. Since the units we used were all in inches, we'll write that this is 339.12 inches to the third power, or inches cubed if that's what you're used to. You may also write this as cu.in for cubic inches. Now that we have our cubic inches, we may try to convert this to liters. Let's start by writing that our beginning is cubic inches. Our end goal is to try to get liters. However, we do not have a direct conversion from cubic inches to liters. Instead, what I've given you is that 1 cubic inch is 16.4 cubic centimeters. However, it's important to realize that cubic centimeters are the same thing as milliliters. These are actually synonyms. There are a number of different ways to write cubic centimeters. You may see cm third power, or just cc, or cu.cm, or just ml. All of these are the same thing. This won't be indicated on your conversion page, so you'll have to remember all of these different ways to say cubic centimeters. Effectively, what we have is a way to get from a US unit, that's cubic inches, to ml, which is a metric unit. Now that we are in metric, we can freely convert to liters, which is another metric unit. Therefore, our first step will be to go from inches cubed to ml. We'll label that with the number 1. and then from milliliters to liters, which we'll label with the number 2. We'll write out the math for this on the next page. On the next page, I've written down the volume we found from step 1, the conversion factor for cubic inches to milliliters, and now let's think about how to go from milliliters to liters. In the metric system, 1 of the base unit gives you 1,000 of any unit with the milli prefix. Our base unit for volume in the metric system, however, is liters. We can say 1 liter is 1,000 of the milli form of liters, or ml. This unit conversion, saying 1 liter equals 1,000 milliliters, will be what we use to take care of step 2. The other piece of information we have, which converts cubic inches to milliliters, we'll use in step 1. Let's write down our volume, 339.12 cubic inches. We'll multiply by 2 fractions. For our first fraction, we'll send cubic inches to the bottom. At the end of step 1, we want to have milliliters. Then we send those milliliters to the bottom, and at the end of the process, we want to have liters. Our first unit conversion has a 1 next to cubic inches. Therefore, we place a 1 next to cubic inches in the fraction. Next to milliliters, we have 16.4. Then the information from our second step says 1 liter is 1,000 milliliters. So we place a 1 next to liters, 1,000 next to milliliters. Our operation then will be 339.12 multiply 16.4. We'll skip the division by 1 and the multiplication by 1 and go straight to dividing by 1,000. Let's now enter this in the calculator. With 339.12 already entered, we multiply by 16.4 and divide by 1,000. We press enter and get 5.56. Now we'll check our units. The inches cubed that we started with will cancel out with the bottom of the first fraction, and the milliliters we have now will cancel out with the bottom of the second fraction, leaving only liters. Therefore, the volume of this cup is 5.56 liters.